Let's get back to Melbourne and Victoria and that lockdown now. And we're joined by Ines Willox from the Australian Industry Group. Good to talk to you again. Ines, you and I have talked for a year about pandemic responses. Really what happened Friday from a business point of view was the worst of all your fears, just a lockdown coming so brutally and so quickly.
Well, Chris, it was what we did fear and what business had feared, and that it means that the only weapon Victoria has, the outbreak of a relative handful of cases, is to lock down the entire state. I think it's fair to say that the business community is a combination of amused, confused and amused by what's gone on in Victoria. We've seen the Victorians change their guidelines 3 times already since Friday around who can and can't open. Businesses that could open last lockdown now have to close. Those that were closed last time are now able to open. There's just confusion everywhere and no clarity at all for business around what they can and can't do, uncertainty about how long the lockdown lasts, and complete befuddlement that regional Victoria is shut down as well, from Witchy-Proof to Wye River or from Portland over to Paynesville. It makes no sense whatsoever to business people locally or those nationally that Victoria seems to be excising itself from the rest of the country.
If any state was going to get some decent procedures in place, you would have picked Victoria because of what you've been through last year. Now, people like me and others and yourself, of course, criticised how long the lockdown went, curfews and other aspects that seemed unnecessary, but nobody disputes that initially Melbourne was dealing with a pretty acute outbreak and some drastic action of some kind needed to be brought in to bring it under control. But the whole argument since then has been about how you isolate and tackle and trace any outbreaks without doing that again, as we've seen in New South Wales. Yet here, at the first sign of grape shot, he's locked down again.
Well, this is the whole question, Chris, around proportionality, and that was the issue that we were really pushing last year, was to have a proportionate response to what was going on in the state. And you would have hoped Victoria would have learnt its lesson and applied lessons. We've had inquiries. You would have hoped that they'd got hotel quarantine right. You would have hoped that they would have understood the economic impact of their decisions. They would have accounted for the broader health of Victorian citizens, the mental health as well. But, you know, to throw an entire state into lockdown again over a relative handful of cases just tells business that this is all that's going to happen now going forward. So you can't plan for that. It's caused massive disruption, massive wastage, lost time, planning's gone out the window. It's really created massive chaos for businesses across Victoria. And they're not going to get that back. And the best estimates are that this 5-day lockdown will cost well over $1 billion for the local economy at a time when Victoria just couldn't, and the nation just couldn't afford it. It's like trying to get back up onto your feet again after being knocked down and then being hit in the back of the head. It was a real knockout blow for a lot of businesses, and for many it will be, unfortunately, the final nail in their coffin.
I said on Friday that Daniel Andrews and Brett Sutton should ring Gladys Berejiklian and Kerry Chant and just get them to tell them what to do. I noticed the opposition has taken up that line in Victoria today, but it sounds like a glib line. But what would be wrong with the Victorian Public Service and Health Department actually getting a few of the key officials from New South Wales going down to Melbourne and explaining to them how to handle these things the way that New South Wales has done?
Well, Chris, let me give you 2 examples. One is a staff member of mine who happened to have to go to Sydney from Melbourne on a family issue last week. Went through the airport on the day in question. She's been contacted 4 times by New South Wales Health Authority and not once by Victorian officials. That tells you there's a problem with the Victorian system. It's the same with the daughter of a friend of ours. She's a bit upset that she's only been contacted 3 times rather than 4 times by New South Wales officials, but not once by Victorian officials. This tells us that, you know, and New South Wales went through this so-called hyper strain of the UK variant back in January, but handled it. This tells us that the Victorian government still hasn't got its systems right. No matter what it said, it still hasn't got its systems right and doesn't have confidence in them. And that is telling the business community that they shouldn't have confidence in Victoria. We wish it was not that way, but that's the message that is coming out of all of this. And I think you and I have discussed, New South Wales is the gold standard here. It truly is. They don't panic and they address the issues locally and in a proportionate way. That's all business asks for, and we're not getting it in Victoria.
Spot on, Ines. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you.
Ines Willox there with some classic examples, real grassroots examples of how New South Wales is doing this thing better. Victoria just needs to copy it, lift its game, not punish people.